You've saved, you've invested, you've done everything right. But now that you're retired or quickly approaching retirement, the question isn't, did I save enough? No, it's how do I actually spend this money without screwing it up? And that's the part that nobody talks about. These answers, you're not going to find them in your HR packet. You're not going to find it on your 401k provider's website through your job. And honestly, most financial advisors don't discuss this topic enough. That's what we're going to dive into today. That's what we're going to talk about. I'm Nick Covio, certified financial planner and founder of Swell Financial. I've helped hundreds of people navigate the journey of retirement. And as I say, stay retired. And I could tell you that the hardest part when it comes to your retirement is not the saving. We know you're great at that. It is spending the money. And it's spending it with confidence and without fear of it running out. And so what we're going to break down in this video is why spending in retirement is way harder than it looks on paper, where traditional financial advice completely misses the mark, and lastly, how to build a spending plan that helps you enjoy your money with more confidence without losing sleep in the future. So let's get ready to get started and dive on in. One of the things that I see over and over again as a financial planner, and I think this even applies to folks that I've worked with $2, $3, $4, $5 million portfolios, they still ask me, can I really spend this much? Well, what if there's another 2008 financial crisis? Or this sounds great today, but what if I run out of money in my 80s? And I get it. The anxiety, it makes total and complete sense. You see, for the last 30 years, you've been a great saver. I know you have. You've accumulated, you've put money into your 401k, and that was your financial identity. And now we're playing an entirely different game. In fact, we're going backwards. We're not adding money, we're pulling money from our accounts. And that could be really scary. It's a big change. We need to certainly acknowledge that. It can feel certainly unnatural. But here's where what I really think that it comes down to. Your stakes are higher in retirement. I get that. And we may be afraid to make a mistake, or maybe we just don't have a plan. And without a clear system, every single withdrawal you take from your account, which investment should I liquidate? Where do I take it from? What about taxes? It could feel like a big risk. And what ends up happening in my experience is one of two things. People either underspend, so they skip the travel, they delay the renovation or the remodel, they say no to the family trip because they're scared to run out of money, or they say we'll do it later. Or worse, they completely change and overhaul their investment portfolio and they pull all the risk out of it, right? They take the stocks out and they go into a hyper conservative mode, all in the name of not losing any money. And both of those situations are really sad because you worked your whole life to get to this point. So we need to create a plan to be able to understand how much you could spend, where you're going to take your money out from, and how to account for taxes. And the whole purpose of retirement, why we do this, you worked hard. It's to enjoy it. That's why whether it's spending, investing, or lowering our taxes, we just have to have a plan, and that's what we're going to dive into today. Retirement researcher Michael Kitces, and you've heard me talk about this before in some of my other videos, talks about the 3 phases of retirement where we have the go-go, slow-go, and no-go years. But in this video, I want to talk about a 4th and earlier stage known as the pre-retirement stage. And I call this our transition runway. These are my favorite clients to work with because there's so much work that we could do here in our 50s and 60s leading up to retirement that could put us in such a better spot getting into retirement. Because if this is you, you're likely still working. You're probably earning more than you ever have in your career. You're saving more, most likely, and you may even be really close to becoming an empty nester. So retirement, it's right around the corner. And now you may begin to start asking yourself, can we actually pull the trigger on this retirement thing? And this is really important. This right here in your 50s or early 60s is your window to make serious progress towards paying down your mortgage, saving into the right type of accounts like your Roth IRA and your brokerage. And we'll talk about that later for future tax flexibility. It's also really important to start doing what I like to call retirement test drives, where we go through and see, well, how much do we actually spend? How would we spend that extra time? Let's take an inventory of our current life, figure out what's lacking, and start making progress towards that. Because in retirement, we're going to have nothing but time, And we have to figure out what we're going to do with it. Because the goal of this stage is to create flexibility, structure, and a plan for the years ahead. Trust me, it's going to make things a lot easier because before you know it, you're going to be in those go-go years where you're now officially retired. You're off the clock. Hey, congratulations. This is now your time to travel. Do the things you've always wanted to do. Plan that next big family vacation, whatever it is that brings you joy, purpose, and fulfillment. Give yourself the permission to do it. Now, it's also important that we have a plan for this season, our go-go years, to make sure that we know how to replace our paycheck. When we're no longer working and now that money every 2 weeks or whatever increment that we need that money coming in has to now come from our investment portfolio, we have to have a plan in place. We also have to take in consideration healthcare costs until Medicare at 65. If we're planning on retiring earlier, how we're going to account for that. And lastly, what we commonly see is retirees, they move. Whether it's chasing grandbabies around and being closer to family in other parts of the country, it's moving and snowbirding to warmer weather, or it's a new community and change of scenery, you need to have a plan that accounts for this. And so it's very natural that during this season in our go-go years, spending usually ticks upwards. Not to be alarmed, this is why you're going to have a plan in place. So when you get that first credit card statement back from your big trip abroad, whether that's Italy or Jamaica, wherever it is, don't freak out. You're going to have a plan in place. And in the second half of this video, we're going to show you how to attack spending later on in just a few moments. Now, once we get into our mid to late 70s or even early 80s, we commonly see that our pace and spending start to slow. And so does especially that discretionary spending and travel when we compare it to our earlier years. And it's in this phase that your required minimum distributions will begin to kick in, starting at age 73, 74, 75, whether we're ready or not, and that could trigger taxes. Our spending on travel tends to taper off, and our day-to-day spending becomes, well, a lot more routine. And now we have to be really careful here because it's common that if we didn't do enough living, traveling, volunteering, whatever it was that's in your plan that brings you joy, purpose, fulfillment, happiness, well, if we didn't get the opportunity to do as much as we wanted to, that feeling of guilt can start to creep in that we should have done more earlier. Because as we transition into those what we call no-go years, it's likely that healthcare will become our biggest expense. And in this phase, as we talked about earlier, travel and discretionary expenses, well, they just change. They look different than in the previous two phases. And now our expenses are going more towards whether it's assisted living, in-home care, rising medical costs, those types of things. And so we have to have a plan, a spending plan that is, that assures two things. One, that we get to be able to live our life in our 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s as robust and full and bold of life as possible, but also accounts for preserving enough assets to handle those long-term care expenses later on during our no-go years. And so that's what we're going to dive into now is how do we actually create that plan? Before we dive into our spending plan, and now that you know how spending typically evolves and changes throughout retirement, if you have questions on what you should be doing to maximize whatever stage that you find yourself in today, what I want you to do is click on the link below, fill out the survey, and I will send you a personalized Loom video analyzing your specific situation and showing you exactly what you need to be doing to make your retirement spending plan airtight. Now, let's change gears here just a bit and pivot from how much you would spend in a different phase of retirement, actually talk hard dollars to figure out what an actual strategy looks like and identify each of their pros and cons because there are a couple different strategies out there. Now, I personally have a favorite strategy as a financial planner, but I do believe that there's no one best true withdrawal strategy. And ultimately, the strategy that you decide to go with has to be one that works for you. And also, your withdrawal strategy is just one part of your overall financial plan, right? We're going to have to figure out taxes and Social Security and how we build your portfolio. So it's just one component, albeit a very important one, but it needs to fit you and your specific plan. Now, the first strategy I think we're all familiar with is the 4% rule, and that came from retirement advisor Bill Bengen in the 90s, and it says you can safely withdraw 4% as your starting portfolio withdrawal amount each year and adjust it for inflation, and you will not run out of money for about 30 years. And what I like about this strategy is that it's simple, it's easy to understand. And what I also like is that it's historically tried and true. It's back tested. Now, what I don't like about it, just my personal preference as a financial advisor, and honestly as a human being, is that it's not flexible. I know with working with my clients and even in my own personal life that I'm not going to spend the exact same amount each and every year. There's going to be changes. And so when we're adjusting for our retirement planning spending amount, we have to be able to have a plan that's flexible and adaptable, which leads me to the second one, which is systematic withdrawals, or what we call our guardrail strategies, where we pull a fixed percentage of our portfolio based off how the market performs. So what that means is when the market does really well, we could afford to spend a little more. But it comes with the big caveat that when the market doesn't do well, like we experienced in 2008, 2020, we have to adjust our spending. Otherwise, we could run the risk of running out of money. But what this allows us to do is be a lot more flexible when it comes to how much we could spend. Because I think the cardinal sin of retirement planning is not running out of money. Yes, we don't want to do that. And I think we'll adjust. We're human beings, and we know if we're starting to get low on funds, we need to make an adjustment. But I think the cardinal sin is actually dying with too much money left over. You think of all the things that you could have used that money for. And so regardless of which strategy that you decide to go with, whether it's a flexible, dynamic strategy where we can adjust it each year, or you say, hey, this is the amount that I'm spending and I'm locking it in, I'll adjust it for inflation. We have to have a plan, and it's really important is you need to monitor it on an ongoing basis, because as your portfolio and the market changes, you need to pay attention to how much money you're pulling out. Which brings me to my next point, which is now that we've identified how much we could safely and securely spend each and every year in retirement, where's that money going to come from? How do we have what's called withdrawal sequencing? Where do we know where we are going to spend our first dollar from in retirement? Is it going to come from our IRA, which is going to be taxed? Is it going to come from our Roth IRA, tax-free? Or is it going to come from our brokerage account, which is taxed much more favorably at capital gains than our pre-tax 401k or IRA? So again, like with anything, we have to have a plan, preferably ahead of time, to take those things into consideration. And when this is done right, this could lead to extra years added onto your portfolio of future spending, thousands of dollars saved in taxes, and quite frankly, just provide more flexibility. This is why I talked about it earlier in the video, that your window while you're still working in those peak earning years is so important to start saving into the right type of accounts to provide yourself with that flexibility. Because when you start taking that first paycheck, we're going to want to have options of where we pull that first dollar from. Before we dive into building your retirement portfolio, let's quickly recap what we've covered so far. First, we clarified how much you could safely spend. Next, we walked through how to reduce your taxes and which accounts to draw your first dollar from in the most tax efficient way. And now we're going to unpack the final piece, which is how to build both your asset allocation, that's your stock to bond ratio, and also your asset location strategy, which is where to most appropriately put those stocks and bonds in different accounts for maximum tax efficiency. Now, in this last section, we're going to break down how to design an investment portfolio that supports your personalized spending plan in retirement. Because like anything, we do have to make the disclaimer that there's no one size fits all approach for an investment portfolio. Rather, your plan needs to reflect your income, your lifestyle, and your values. And your portfolio, just like your financial plan, should change and adapt as your life and retirement circumstances changes. Otherwise, all those recommendations and spreadsheets and financial plans, they're just good for kindling and lighting your next campfire or just a heavy paperweight, right? So to build your financial plan that fits for you and your family and your retirement circumstances, we have to factor in a couple things. First, we need to know your comfort level for taking on investment risk. I get it. The stock market at times can be really volatile. It can be really scary, especially once we hit the stop button on contributing into our investment account. And now we're going the opposite direction where we're pulling money out. It can be really scary. We talked about it earlier. One of the most common mistakes that I see is people go too far in being conservative in such that they go all into cash or bonds, or they don't take on enough investment risk. So we have to first understand how much risk we can take on. And when I talk about that, investment risk, it's two parts. It's the subjective nature, which is understanding what's right for you. And, I tell my clients a lot of times, if you can't sleep at night because of the stock market, you may be taking on too much risk and we should have a conversation. Now, number two, this is where I want to challenge you. It's also objective. You're going to need to take on some amount of investment risk to be able to reach your goals, because you're not taking every single dollar out day one of retirement. Rather, that retirement needs to be able to last for 10, 15, 20, 30 years. So what we have to do is segment our assets to be able to reflect different time periods of our retirement, right? Money that's needed in the next 1 to 3 or 5 years is going to be invested differently than money that's invested 10, 20, or 30 years from now. So it's all about having that plan and understanding how much risk do you ultimately feel comfortable with. Now, number two, you've heard me talk about it a number of times. We need to know our income sources, whether it's Social Security, a pension, rental income, a part-time job, because at the end of the day, retirement is simply just a basic math equation. It's what are your expenses minus what do you have coming in from those income sources, and whatever amount that's short, it's going to need to rely then on your investment portfolio. When we look at that, then we have to figure out how much is coming from our portfolio. And we've talked in the past about distribution rates. And so we have to remember understanding our sources of income is such a key and critical point for our retirement and how we build our portfolio. If we don't need as much of that money to come from our portfolio, guess what? We can afford, this is the objective piece, to be more aggressive. However, on the other side, if we need to rely on our portfolio even more to supplement our retirement, well, then we need to take on a little less investment risk because we have a greater need for that retirement paycheck. And then number three, we have to understand what our goals are, right? Personal finance, hey, keyword there, it's personal. It's not your neighbor's plan. It's not your cousin's plan, your brother, your sister, anybody else's. It's you and your family. And so you're going to have different spending goals. You're going to want to do different things. And how you orient and structure your portfolio is going to reflect, the things that are most important to you, whether that's earmarking certain money for certain things that are important to you. Because from there, once we understand that, we could then begin to build a portfolio based on when do you need to start taking your money out by? When do you need that first dollar? Because remember, we talked about the goal is to replace your paycheck in work with now what we call retirement paycheck. And so to do so, we're going to need to have an investment strategy that provides us with enough cash and liquidity to meet our monthly living expenses or our retirement paycheck. We're going to have a game plan that tells us, hey, when big changes occur, whether it's a market correction or a big increased spending event like a vacation or a down payment on a new house, we need to adjust our financial plan and our investment portfolio. And for me, I personally prefer, and this is how we work with our clients, to build a portfolio in the way of building individual and separate buckets, where each one of those buckets is segmented based off of time. Our first bucket is based off of years 1, 2, 3, maybe 4 and 5, where it's cash. It's very short-term liquid instruments, whether it's short-term treasuries, those types of bonds. And then we have our second bucket, which allows us to say, hey, from years 5 to 7 or 5 to 10, we can mix that with a healthy balance of a different type of bond, whether it's longer in maturity and duration, or it's investing outside of treasuries into corporates or global bonds that provide us more income, or investing in a mix of stocks as well. Because when we get to that third bucket, which is for future you 10 years from now, we have to make sure now that mindset is for growth. It's for appreciation, because what the idea here is we want to backfill your buckets as they get depleted. Right? And we're backfilling with the growth that we have in the stock market from our last bucket. Think of it as a cascading waterfall. And what was so important to do with that last bucket is we can't disrupt it for any reason, right? Because to get that long-term average that we've heard a lot of the media and financial news talk about, whether it's 8 or 10 or 12%, depending on how they measure it, that assumes that we're not selling it during a down market to be able to finance our retirement plan. That's why we need to segment it between cash, bonds, and stocks. And this setup helps give us peace of mind and helps protect our growth during market dips and volatility, because having it segmented that way can allow us to meet our living expenses during any season or whatever life throws our way. And so what we're doing there is we're building flexibility so that we can pivot whenever we need to. Now, if you want help applying this to your situation, simply click on the link below, fill out the survey, enter your information, and what I'll do is I'll personally review that information you sent, and I'll provide a short Loom video where we'll break down your specific retirement game plan. I'll provide suggestions to how we want to approach retirement and your spending strategy. Because remember, you don't have to guess your way through this. Retirement planning can be confusing, but it doesn't have to be. Let's give your money a plan, and let's give your life the freedom it deserves. I want to say thank you again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.